Imagine standing in the vast desert of Arafat under the scorching Arabian sun, surrounded by an immense crowd of people, men and women, rich and poor, Arabs and non-Arabs, all united under one banner, Islam. It is the 9th of Dhul Hijjah in the year 632 CE, and Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, stands before them, delivering what will be his final sermon. The atmosphere is one of awe and reverence, as thousands listen intently, aware that these may be the last words they hear from the Messenger of Allah. His voice, firm yet filled with compassion, carries across the gathering his message not just for those present, but for all of humanity and for all generations to come. The weight of the moment is immeasurable. What he is about to say will serve as a guide for countless individuals who will come after him, as relevant today as it was over 1,400 years ago. This sermon was no ordinary speech. It was a declaration, a universal message that captured the essence of Islam, offering profound guidance on justice, equality, human dignity, and the sanctity of life. It was a summary of his 23 years of prophethood, a final reminder to his followers about their responsibilities to one another and their ultimate accountability before Allah. Unlike political speeches that fade over time or social doctrines that evolve with history, the Prophet's last sermon stands timeless. It remains one of the most significant addresses in Islamic history, revered not just by Muslims, but by all who seek moral clarity and a foundation for human rights. Have you ever wondered what words the most influential man in history chose to leave behind as his legacy? What did he emphasize in his farewell message to the world? Why is this sermon studied, quoted, and referenced to this day? The answers lie in its profound wisdom, its ability to transcend cultural and historical boundaries, and its unwavering call to unity, justice, and righteousness. One of the most striking aspects of the sermon is its emphasis on the equality of all people. At a time when tribalism and social hierarchy dictated one's status, the Prophet abolished all notions of racial and ethnic superiority in a few powerful sentences. He declared that no Arab has any superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. Likewise, no white person is superior to a black person, nor is a black person superior to a white person, except in piety and righteousness. These words were revolutionary, challenging deeply ingrained prejudices and establishing a principle that the modern world still struggles to uphold. How often do we forget these teachings? How often do we allow our differences to divide us rather than unite us? Beyond racial equality, the sermon reinforced the rights of women, urging kindness and fairness in their treatment. It spoke of justice, calling on people to uphold honesty and righteousness in all their dealings. It was a reminder that all individuals would one day stand before their Creator, where wealth, power, and lineage would hold no value, and only one's deeds would matter. In essence, it was a call to self-awareness and accountability. A reminder that while this world is temporary, the impact of our actions carries eternal significance. Despite the timeless beauty of these words, human societies have continued to struggle with the very issues the Prophet addressed. Racism, inequality, injustice, and discrimination persist, often in new and complex forms. In a world where divisions seem to grow deeper each day, where communities are fractured, families are divided, and nations stand at odds, the lessons from this sermon are more relevant than ever. If these words were truly put into practice, if people truly embodied their meaning, imagine the kind of world we would live in today. A world where no person is judged by their skin color, no woman is denied her rightful place in society, and no individual is treated unfairly based on wealth or status. A world where human dignity is not just an ideal, but a reality. As we reflect on these teachings, it is essential to ask ourselves, have we truly embraced the message of the last sermon? Are we living by its principles, or have we allowed its lessons to become distant echoes of the past? The Prophet's words were meant to be a living guide, shaping the way we interact with one another, the way we govern our societies, and the way we view our place in this world. They call us not just to listen, but to act, to rise above division, to treat one another with dignity, and to reconnect with the values that truly matter. The time has come to look beyond the words and embody their meaning. This is not just a sermon to be recited, it is a message to be lived. The question now is, are we ready to take that step? The last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was not just a farewell address to his followers. It was a timeless declaration meant for all of humanity. It was delivered during his final pilgrimage to Makkah in the year 632 CE on the sacred plains of Arafat, where over 100,000 of his companions had gathered. This was no ordinary moment. The Prophet, after years of struggle, persecution, migration, and the eventual establishment of an Islamic state, stood before the people with a message that would resonate for all time. It was a defining moment in history, one that encapsulated the entire essence of Islam and its guiding principles. The setting was profound. The sun blazed in the sky, the desert winds carried the weight of the occasion, and the hearts of those gathered were filled with both devotion and an unspoken understanding that their beloved prophet's mission was nearing its completion. These were men and women who had witnessed the most remarkable transformation of a society, one that had moved from tribal conflicts, ignorance, and moral corruption to unity, faith, and justice under the banner of Islam. They had followed him through times of hardship and sacrifice, through battles and treaties, through years of unwavering faith, and now they stood before him in what would be one of the most pivotal moments of their lives. The Prophet began his sermon with a call for attention, addressing the entire assembly as equals, not differentiating between the elite and the commoners, nor between those who had been with him since the beginning and those who had embraced Islam in its later years. He emphasized the sacredness of life, honor, and wealth, comparing them to the sanctity of the day, the month, and the holy city of Makkah itself. In a time when blood feuds and revenge killings had been rampant in pre-Islamic Arabia, this was a revolutionary message. He declared that all past claims of vengeance had been abolished under Islam, and that the only measure of a person's worth in the sight of Allah was piety and good deeds. The significance of this moment extended far beyond the gathering at Arafat. Prophet Muhammad was addressing not only those present, but also every generation that would come after them. The sermon was not specific to a particular time or place, nor was it meant only for the people of Arabia. Its principles were universal, offering guidance that transcended race, nationality, and class. He reinforced the idea that all people originated from the same source, Adam, and that no one was superior to another except by virtue of their character and faith. The message was clear. Islam stood against all forms of discrimination and injustice, calling for a world in which people were united by their devotion to their Creator and their commitment to righteousness. One of the most remarkable aspects of this sermon was that it came at a time when Islam had already gained significant political and social power. The Prophet was not addressing an oppressed minority anymore. He was leading a community that had grown into a dominant force in the region, yet he did not speak of conquest or superiority. Instead, he reminded the people to be just, to treat one another with fairness, and to uphold the principles of kindness and equity that Islam had instilled. Even in a position of authority, the Prophet's message was one of humility, peace, and responsibility. As the sermon continued, the Prophet spoke of the rights of women, calling for their fair treatment and respect. In a society that had once devalued women and denied them basic rights, this was a powerful and unprecedented statement. He reminded men that women were a trust from Allah, deserving of dignity and kindness. This message remains just as relevant today, as women around the world still struggle for equal opportunities and protection against injustice. The Prophet's words serve as a timeless reminder that the honor and well-being of women are integral to a just society. The Prophet also addressed the responsibilities of Muslims toward one another, urging them to remain united and to uphold the teachings of Islam. He warned against divisions and disputes, emphasizing that true success lay in following the Quran and his Sunnah. The message was simple yet profound. As long as Muslims remained connected to these divine sources of guidance, they would never go astray. However, history has shown that when this connection weakens, societies become vulnerable to corruption, oppression, and division. The Prophet's sermon was a call to remain steadfast, to hold on to the faith with sincerity, and to always strive for justice and righteousness. Perhaps the most significant moment of the sermon was when the Prophet proclaimed that he had fulfilled his mission. He asked the crowd if he had delivered the message of Islam in its entirety, and they responded with a resounding confirmation. Raising his hands to the sky, he called upon Allah as his witness that he had conveyed the truth. It was a moment of immense gravity, as it marked the completion of the Prophet's duty on earth. Shortly after, the divine revelation descended. Today, I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen Islam as your religion. Quran 5:3. This verse signified the finality of revelation and the perfection of the divine message. The historical significance of this sermon cannot be overstated. It was a message meant to be remembered, preserved, and acted upon by every Muslim across generations. It set forth the foundational principles of Islamic civilization and provided a framework for human conduct that remains unmatched in its wisdom and clarity. Despite the passage of centuries, the lessons embedded in the sermon continue to be relevant in today's world. Societies still struggle with inequality, racism, and injustice. Families and communities remain divided over differences of culture, status, and ideology. Wars and conflicts are still waged over wealth and power. Yet, the last sermon of Prophet Muhammad offers the very solutions humanity desperately seeks. The Prophet's final address stands as a universal call for unity, justice, and devotion to Allah. It serves as a reminder that the true measure of a person is not their race, wealth, or lineage, but their righteousness and sincerity in faith. It calls for the protection of human rights, the establishment of peace, and the rejection of all forms of oppression. It is a message of hope, a divine guide that continues to illuminate the path for those who seek truth and moral clarity. As we reflect on the historical context of this sermon, we must also ask ourselves whether we are truly living by its teachings. Have we embraced its message, or have we allowed its wisdom to become a forgotten relic of the past? The sermon was meant to be more than words spoken on a single day in history. It was meant to be a guiding light for all time. The last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is a testament to the values that Islam upholds and serves as a blueprint for how humanity should live in harmony. It was delivered in a manner that left no ambiguity, a message that would transcend time and remain relevant for generations. The sermon distilled the essence of faith into a few profound lessons, touching upon justice, human dignity, equality, the sanctity of life, the rights of women, and the importance of faith and accountability. It was not just a farewell address, but a universal declaration of principles that, if followed, would lead to a world of peace, fairness, and righteousness. One of the most powerful and revolutionary messages of the last sermon was the emphasis on unity and equality. In a society that had been deeply entrenched in tribal superiority, racial hierarchies, and social divisions, the Prophet stood before the gathering and declared that all humans are equal in the sight of Allah. He reminded the people that they all descended from Adam, who himself was created from dust, and that no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, nor is a non-Arab superior to an Arab. Similarly, no white person is superior to a black person, nor is a black person superior to a white person, except by piety and good deeds. These words struck at the heart of one of humanity's most persistent problems: discrimination. Over 1,000 years later, societies continue to grapple with racial injustice, ethnic divisions, and class-based oppression. The Prophet's words provide the perfect antidote to such societal ills, reminding people that true worth is not found in lineage, wealth, or appearance, but in righteousness. This profound statement on equality was not just theoretical. The Prophet himself embodied this message throughout his life. He treated people from all walks of life with the same respect and dignity. His companions reflected this teaching in their own interactions, forming a society where former slaves, rulers, and merchants stood side by side as brothers in faith. Yet, despite this timeless guidance, humanity has continued to struggle with discrimination and bias. If these teachings were truly implemented today, the world would see an end to racism, bigotry, and the unjust structures that have plagued civilizations for centuries. The measure of a person would no longer be their skin color, nationality, or wealth, but rather their moral character and faith. Beyond racial and social equality, the Prophet emphasized justice and the prohibition of oppression. He declared that no one should harm another, and that all past claims of vengeance and blood feuds were abolished under Islam. This was a significant moment in a society where revenge and cycles of retribution were common. The Prophet's message broke the chains of endless conflict by urging people to forgive and to treat one another with fairness. He reinforced that no person had the right to exploit another, and that wealth and power should not be used as tools of oppression. Justice, he emphasized, was not conditional or selective. It was a duty owed to every individual, regardless of status or background. Justice in Islam is one of its defining characteristics, and the Quran repeatedly calls upon believers to uphold fairness in all aspects of life. The Prophet warned that oppression leads to darkness on the day of judgment and urged people to fulfill their obligations honestly. Today, societies are still plagued by corruption, economic exploitation, and political oppression. The disparity between the rich and the poor grows wider, and injustices are often committed in the name of power and greed. The Prophet's words remind humanity that without justice, there can be no true peace. If leaders and individuals alike adhered to these principles, the world would see a transformation where honesty, integrity, and fairness become the foundation of all human interactions. Another crucial point in the sermon was the dignity and rights of women. The Prophet addressed the men of his time and reminded them that women were a trust from Allah. He commanded that they be treated with kindness, love, and fairness, emphasizing that they had rights just as men had rights over them. This statement was groundbreaking in a society where women were often treated as inferior and denied basic human rights. Islam brought forth a revolution in how women were perceived, granting them the right to inheritance, education, financial independence, and protection against mistreatment. Yet, despite these clear teachings, many societies still struggle with gender inequality. In some parts of the world, women continue to face discrimination, lack of opportunities, and even violence. The Prophet's words are a stark reminder that true faith demands justice and respect for women. It is not enough to claim belief while denying women their rightful place in society. The message of Islam calls for the empowerment of women within the boundaries of faith and morality, ensuring that they are honored, valued, and given the opportunities they deserve. The Prophet also reminded his followers about the importance of faith and accountability. He declared that he was leaving behind two things: the Quran and his Sunnah, and that as long as people held firmly to these, they would never go astray. This was a call to remain connected to the divine guidance that had been revealed over 23 years, a reminder that Islam was not just a set of rituals, but a comprehensive way of life. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet contain the wisdom necessary to navigate every aspect of existence, from personal development to governance, from economic transactions to social relationships. However, in the modern world, distractions have led many away from faith. Materialism, entertainment, and worldly ambitions often take precedence over spiritual growth. Many people find themselves lost in the pursuit of success, neglecting their relationship with Allah. The Prophet's words serve as a wake-up call, urging believers to hold tightly to their faith, to prioritize their connection with their Creator, and to remember that life is fleeting. The true measure of success is not wealth or status, but how closely one follows the guidance of Islam. Another key message in the sermon was the reality of accountability in the hereafter. The Prophet reminded the people that they would one day stand before Allah, where their deeds would be judged, and that no soul would be wronged. He made it clear that wealth, lineage, and worldly accomplishments would hold no value on that day. The only thing that would matter was a person's faith and their actions. This was a reminder that every individual is responsible for their own deeds and that justice will ultimately be served. This teaching encourages people to live with a sense of purpose and mindfulness. When one is aware that they will be held accountable for their actions, they are more likely to uphold honesty, kindness, and integrity. Imagine a world where leaders, businessmen, and everyday individuals truly believed in divine accountability. Corruption, deceit, and injustice would significantly decrease, and people would strive to do good not just for personal gain, but for the sake of righteousness. The last sermon was not just about moral guidance, it was also a call to action. The Prophet urged his followers to spread the message of Islam, to continue living by its teachings, and to uphold the values that he had imparted. He made it clear that the religion was now complete, that the favor of Allah had been bestowed upon them, and that Islam was the path to righteousness. The moment was deeply emotional, as the people realized that their beloved prophet was nearing the end of his mission. He asked them if he had fulfilled his duty, and when they confirmed that he had, he called upon Allah as his witness. This marked the completion of divine revelation. Shortly after, the verse was revealed. "Today, I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your religion." Quran 5:3. This was a moment of both triumph and farewell, a declaration that Islam was now fully established as a comprehensive way of life. The responsibility to uphold its teachings had now been passed on to the believers. The Prophet's last sermon continues to be a guiding light for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Its teachings on equality, justice, women's rights, faith, and accountability remain as relevant today as they were on that fateful day in Arafat. It is a message that transcends time, calling upon people to rise above division, to treat one another with dignity, and to live with a sense of moral responsibility. The true test lies in whether individuals and societies are willing to take these words to heart and implement them in their daily lives. The Prophet's legacy was not meant to be a relic of history. It was meant to be lived, honored, and carried forward into every generation. Throughout history, the last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, has remained a beacon of guidance, wisdom, and justice. Its universal message of equality, human dignity, and faith continues to inspire people across generations. However, despite the profound teachings contained in this final address, misconceptions persist about its relevance, meaning, and applicability in the modern world. Some claim that the sermon was intended only for the people of the 7th century, while others argue that Islam enforces outdated social structures or harsh laws. There are also misunderstandings about its emphasis on justice, the treatment of women, and the unity of humanity. These misconceptions arise from a combination of misinformation, cultural misinterpretations, and a lack of understanding of the true teachings of Islam. One of the most common misconceptions about the last sermon is that its teachings were meant only for the people of that time and do not hold relevance today. Critics argue that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was addressing a specific audience in a particular historical context, and that his words should not be applied to the complexities of the modern world. However, this could not be further from the truth. The principles emphasized in the sermon, justice, human equality, compassion, and accountability, are universal and timeless. These are not teachings bound by era or geography. Rather, they are foundational principles that apply to every society, regardless of time period. The Prophet made it clear that his message was meant for all people, not just the Arabs of his time, when he declared that all of humanity comes from Adam, and that the only distinction between individuals is their piety and righteousness. This message was not specific to the early Muslims, but was directed toward all future generations, calling on them to uphold fairness, respect, and unity. The relevance of this sermon is evident when looking at the problems that plague modern societies. Issues such as racism, economic injustice, political corruption, and the mistreatment of marginalized groups continue to exist, just as they did in pre-Islamic Arabia. The Prophet's words remain as powerful today as they were over 1,400 years ago, because they address fundamental human rights and moral responsibilities that are essential for building a just and ethical society. The Quran reinforces this universality in multiple verses, including the statement, "And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to the worlds." Quran 21:107. Islam's core message is for all of humanity, and its teachings serve as solutions to the problems that continue to afflict societies. Another widespread misconception is that Islam enforces inequality, particularly toward women, and that the last sermon did not go far enough in promoting women's rights. Some critics argue that the Prophet's address still placed men in a superior position, reinforcing traditional gender roles. However, this interpretation fails to recognize the groundbreaking nature of his words within the context of his time and the rights that Islam granted to women. The Prophet explicitly reminded men that women were a trust from Allah, and that they should be treated with kindness, love, and fairness. He emphasized that just as men had rights over women, women also had rights over men, reinforcing the idea of mutual respect and responsibilities in marriage and society. At a time when women were seen as property and denied the most basic human rights, these words were revolutionary. Islam granted women rights that were unheard of in many other civilizations of the time, including the right to inherit, to own property, to seek education, and to participate in public life. The Prophet's words in the last sermon reinforced these rights and laid the foundation for the protection of women's dignity. The idea that Islam oppresses women is often based on cultural practices that have deviated from the true teachings of the religion. In reality, the last sermon made it clear that women are to be honored, respected, and treated with the fairness they deserve. Another misunderstanding surrounding the last sermon is the notion that Islam promotes harsh laws and lacks compassion. Some argue that Islamic teachings are rigid and overly focused on punishment rather than mercy, painting a picture of a faith that is severe rather than compassionate. However, this perception is a distortion of the actual message of Islam. The Prophet's final address was filled with reminders of mercy, kindness, and justice. He instructed his followers not to harm one another and emphasized that all forms of oppression were prohibited. He warned against wrongdoing and injustice, encouraging people to live lives of righteousness and fairness. Islam, as demonstrated in both the Quran and the Sunnah, balances justice with mercy. Punishments in Islamic law serve as deterrents, not as tools of cruelty, and they exist within a framework that emphasizes repentance, forgiveness, and social harmony. The Prophet himself embodied this balance, showing incredible compassion even to those who opposed him. He forgave those who had persecuted him and his followers, demonstrating that the essence of Islam is not vengeance, but justice tempered with mercy. The last sermon reinforced this message, reminding people of their moral and social responsibilities to one another, urging kindness, and advocating for the fair treatment of all individuals. There is also a misconception that Islam encourages division between Muslims and non-Muslims, promoting an us versus them mentality. Some believe that the last sermon only applies to believers, and that Islam discourages peaceful coexistence with those outside the faith. This is a misunderstanding of both the sermon and Islamic teachings as a whole. The Prophet's words emphasize the unity of humanity, stating that all people are from Adam and Eve, reinforcing the idea that no one is inherently superior to another based on race or ethnicity. This principle extends beyond the Muslim community to all of humanity. The Quran makes it clear that there is no compulsion in religion and that people of different faiths should be treated with justice and kindness. The Prophet himself interacted with non-Muslims with the utmost fairness, forging alliances, engaging in trade, and upholding treaties. The notion that Islam promotes division contradicts the very essence of the last sermon, which calls for unity, respect, and moral responsibility. It was never a message of exclusion, but a call for people to recognize their shared humanity and to treat one another with dignity. One final misconception is the belief that the last sermon was simply a farewell speech with no long-term significance. Some view it as a historical moment rather than a guiding principle for future generations. However, this overlooks the weight of the occasion and the Prophet's deliberate choice of words. He did not merely speak to his followers about their personal lives. He addressed systemic issues, social justice, and the framework for a righteous society. His sermon was a declaration of the core values that would define Islam, summarizing the entire mission of his prophethood. The significance of the sermon is further reinforced by the revelation that followed. Shortly after the Prophet concluded his address, the verse was revealed. "Today, I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your religion." Quran 5:3. This marked the completion of divine revelation, affirming that the teachings imparted in the sermon were meant to guide humanity for all time. The Prophet's words were not just a farewell, but a foundation, a reminder of what Islam stood for, and a message that would continue to hold relevance across generations. Addressing these misconceptions is essential in understanding the true meaning and importance of the last sermon. It was a message of unity, justice, compassion, and accountability, principles that remain critical in today's world. The Prophet's final address was not bound by time or culture. It was a divine directive for humanity to embrace righteousness and treat one another with fairness. The challenges of racism, inequality, and injustice persist, proving that the Prophet's words are as relevant today as they were in the desert of Arafat over 14 centuries ago. If the world truly understood and implemented the teachings of this sermon, societies would move closer to peace, harmony, and universal brotherhood. It is not just a sermon to be studied, it is a message to be lived. Ahmed had grown up in a world of divisions. Born into a well-off family in a modern city, he had never truly questioned the subtle prejudices that shaped his upbringing. He had been taught to value status, to judge people by their wealth, education, and background. Though he considered himself a good person, his circle of friends all looked and thought like him. He avoided those he considered beneath him, not out of malice, but because society had always told him that people of different races, economic statuses, or beliefs had little in common with him. He moved through life without ever realizing that these walls he had built were keeping him from experiencing the richness of true human connection. One Friday afternoon, Ahmed attended the weekly congregational prayer at his local mosque, as he had done countless times before. But this time, something felt different. The Imam began reciting the last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, "Peace and blessings be upon him." Ahmed had heard parts of it before, but had never truly reflected on its meaning. The words echoed in the prayer hall, and for the first time, they struck his heart in a way he had never expected. The Imam's voice carried through the silence. "O people, your Lord is one, and your Father is one. You are all from Adam, and Adam was created from dust. No Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. No white person is superior to a black person, nor is a black person superior to a white person, except by piety and good deeds." Ahmed felt a chill run through him. He had always been aware of Islam's teachings on equality, but he had never truly internalized them. These were not just poetic words from the past. They were a call to action, a challenge to every individual to examine their own biases, and break free from the chains of arrogance and division. For the first time, Ahmed realized that he had been carrying the very prejudices that the Prophet had sought to eliminate. He thought about the way he had distanced himself from people who came from different backgrounds, the silent judgments he had made about colleagues and neighbors, and the unspoken superiority he felt when comparing himself to those who struggled financially. He had always assumed he was living a righteous life, yet the Prophet's sermon made him question whether he had truly embodied the values of Islam. After the prayer ended, Ahmed sat in deep reflection. He recalled moments when he had witnessed injustice, but had remained silent. He remembered the foreign worker at his office whom he had never bothered to get to know, the janitor he passed every morning without acknowledgement, and the distant relatives he avoided because they were not as well educated as him. The realization weighed heavily on him. He had spent his life building barriers instead of bridges, despite the fact that his own faith had commanded him to do the opposite. Determined to make a change, Ahmed decided that he could not let these lessons remain abstract thoughts in his mind. He needed to act. The next day, he made an effort to engage in conversations with colleagues he had previously ignored. He struck up a conversation with Samir, a man of African descent who worked in the same office but whom Ahmed had never taken the time to know. He quickly realized how much he had been missing. Samir was wise, kind, and had a depth of experience that Ahmed had never noticed before. Over time, what started as small talk turned into a genuine friendship. Ahmed also began volunteering at a local charity that provided aid to refugees and low-income families. He met people from different walks of life, people who had faced struggles he could never have imagined. He listened to their stories, saw their strength, and realized how much the artificial divisions of society had blinded him to the reality of human dignity. He came to understand that wealth, status, and nationality were fleeting. But the kindness, integrity, and sincerity of a person were what truly mattered. One of the most transformative moments in Ahmed's journey came when he visited a small community mosque where worshippers from all backgrounds gathered. Unlike the grand, elite spaces he was used to, this mosque was humble, filled with people from diverse ethnicities and economic statuses. As he stood shoulder to shoulder in prayer with individuals he had once subconsciously distanced himself from, he felt a profound sense of unity. It was as if the walls he had built in his heart had finally crumbled. In that moment, he understood what the Prophet had meant when he declared that all of humanity was one, that no one was superior to another except through piety. Over the months, Ahmed noticed that his heart had changed. He felt lighter, freer. He no longer saw people through the lens of societal labels, but through their character, their kindness, and their faith. The teachings of the last sermon had not just opened his eyes, they had reshaped his entire worldview. He no longer wished to live a life dictated by superficial status. Instead, he sought to embody the spirit of justice, equality, and compassion that the Prophet had preached. His transformation did not go unnoticed. His family and friends began to see the difference in the way he spoke and interacted with others. An elderly uncle, who had always shared rigid views on social class, observed Ahmed's newfound openness and curiosity toward people from all backgrounds. "You've changed, Ahmed," he said one evening. "What happened?" Ahmed smiled and replied, "I finally understood the words of our Prophet." His journey was not perfect, and there were times when he still caught himself reverting to old ways of thinking. But he remained committed to growth. He reminded himself of the Prophet's words whenever he felt pride or prejudice creeping in. He knew that true change required constant effort, and he embraced it with sincerity. The impact of the last sermon extended far beyond Ahmed. As he shared his experiences and reflections with those around him, he saw others begin to question their own biases. His small actions, offering respect to those often overlooked, standing up for justice, and treating all people with equal dignity, began to inspire those around him. He realized that change did not require grand gestures. It required a shift in perspective. a commitment to living by the principles that the Prophet had left behind. The last sermon was not just a speech from the past, it was a call to action in the present. Ahmed had spent years hearing its words, but it was only when he chose to live by them that he truly understood their power. His story was not unique. Countless others had experienced similar transformations by embracing the teachings of the Prophet. And just as the sermon had changed Ahmed's life, it held the power to change the world. If only people were willing to listen, reflect, and act. As he continued his journey, Ahmed knew that his mission was far from over. The last sermon had set a path before him, a path of justice, humility, and love. And as long as he remained on that path, he would always find purpose, meaning, and the true essence of faith. The words of the last sermon are not just meant to be recited and admired, they are meant to be lived. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, delivered this message as a universal guide, not for one group of people or one period in history, but for all of humanity, for all time. Its emphasis on unity, justice, equality, and accountability remains as relevant today as it was over 1,400 years ago. Yet the question remains, are we truly living by these words? Have we allowed them to shape our actions, our relationships, and our societies? Or have we merely treated them as history, words that are spoken but not practiced? The true essence of faith is not found in words alone, but in the way we carry them into our daily lives. When the Prophet declared that no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and no white person is superior to a black person, he was not just making a statement, he was laying the foundation for a world free of prejudice. But do we, as individuals, embody this principle in the way we treat others? Do we stand against racism, tribalism, and discrimination in our workplaces, schools, and communities? Or do we remain silent when we see injustice unfold before us, thinking it is someone else's problem to solve? Justice was at the heart of the last sermon, a reminder that every individual has a duty to uphold fairness, whether in their personal lives or in society at large. The Prophet warned against oppression, against harming others, and against dishonesty in dealings. Yet in today's world, corruption is rampant, and people often turn a blind eye to injustice as long as it does not affect them directly. It is easy to admire the Prophet's words, but true faith lies in practicing them. To live by his teachings means to stand up for those who are wronged, to speak out against injustice even when it is uncomfortable, and to ensure that our own dealings, whether in business, friendships, or leadership, are rooted in integrity. The message of the last sermon extended beyond justice. It was also a call for compassion, for human dignity, for the rights of women, and for mutual respect between people. The Prophet reminded his followers that women are a trust from Allah, deserving of kindness and fairness. But has the world upheld this trust? Have we ensured that women receive the dignity and respect that Islam grants them? Or have we allowed cultural biases and societal pressures to overshadow this divine instruction? It is not enough to claim to follow Islam while denying people their rights. The last sermon calls upon every believer to treat others with fairness, whether in families, workplaces, or society at large. At its core, the last sermon was a reminder of accountability. The Prophet, peace be upon him, made it clear that every individual will one day stand before Allah, where their actions, not their wealth, status, or lineage, will determine their fate. This reality should change the way we live. If every person truly believed in divine accountability, dishonesty would disappear, kindness would prevail, and people would treat one another with sincerity and care. Yet, distractions pull people away from this awareness. Material success, social status, and temporary pleasures often take precedence over faith. The last sermon calls for reflection, an opportunity to realign our priorities, to remember that life is fleeting and that the true measure of success lies in righteousness. The Prophet's words demand more than acknowledgement, they demand transformation. They call on every individual to be an agent of change, to not simply wait for a better world, but to actively work toward building one. The teachings of the last sermon should shape the way we interact with our families, the way we conduct ourselves in society, and the way we stand up for truth and justice. They remind us that every choice we make carries weight, that the way we treat others is a reflection of our faith, and that the path to a meaningful life is found in living with integrity, humility, and devotion. The time for reflection is now. The prophet asked those who heard his sermon to spread his message, to ensure that those who were absent would hear the same truth. That responsibility does not end with the companions who stood at Arafat. It extends to every believer today. It is our duty to ensure that the message of unity, equality, and justice is not just something we hear, but something we carry forward in our own lives. It is a reminder to challenge prejudice, to uphold fairness, to respect one another, and to always remember that, in the eyes of Allah, our worth is measured not by our wealth or lineage, but by the sincerity of our faith and the goodness of our deeds. This is the moment to take action, to turn words into practice, and to let the last sermon guide not just our thoughts, but our every interaction, decision, and choice. The prophet left us with a message of hope and responsibility. The question is, will we live by it? As we reflect on the powerful words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, let us strive to embody his teachings in our daily lives. His message was not just for the past. It is a guiding light for the present and the future. If this reminder resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Islamic Insights for more content that deepens our understanding of faith, history, and spiritual growth. May Allah guide us all to walk in the footsteps of the Prophet and live by his timeless wisdom. Until next time, stay inspired, stay connected, and may peace and blessings be upon you.